And gentlemen, welcome to WeatherBrains episode number 1053. Can you believe it? We have done 1053 episodes of this show. Goodness gracious. Well, welcome. We're glad you're here. This is the pre-show. This is the magical, marvelous, wonderful part of the program where we typically do three things. We share boring personal stories, humorous anecdotes, and from time to time, we say some really outrageous things. So it's going to be a good show tonight. Mike Brennan, the director of the National Hurricane Center, will be one of our guests. And obviously, we'll talk about the hurricane season, NHC, what's going on there. But anyway, it's here we are, March 23rd. Last week, I don't even know if I was coherent on the show last Monday night. I had been up all night, and that's no exaggeration. I mean, this was a no-sleep night. We worked storms all night, Sunday night into Monday morning, and then it started snowing. And when that happens, it just doesn't stop. So, yeah, last Monday night was a blur, but we had no storms this weekend, no storms last night, and I am refreshed and revived and ready to go here. In fact, what's amazing, we actually have a surface front passing through our neck of the woods here with nothing, no meaningful weather. I mean, for a surface front to come through here in mid-March without some type of heavy rain, severe weather, high impact event, that's very anomalous. So we are thankful for that. But anyway, if you're looking for the actual show content, move the slider over about 7 minutes. But hey, you might miss something good. You never know. But yeah, we had snow on the ground here at this low latitude along Interstate 20 1 week ago. And then, of course, we had temperatures in the 80s over the weekend. And this week we're going to fluctuate some here. But again, it's really remarkable. It's just amazingly calm. And you know what's going to happen? It's probably going to break loose. But this is the time of the year where people get really cranky. What they want to do is plant stuff. And I am not a green thumb guy. I'm not. But for those that want to plant something that would be damaged or harmed by a late season freeze or frost, I give the same advice every year where we are. Wait until April 15th, tax day, based on pure climatology. No forecasting, just climatology. We almost always have a meaningful late season cold snap here at some point during the first half of April. And so many people spend a lot of money on these fancy flowers and plants, and they put them in the ground, and they get whacked by that big cold snap. And we have had big snow here in early April. We've had some really big ones the first week of April, but it looks like temperature should be above average here through first couple of days of April. But you know what's probably going to happen? We'll get a big tornado deal, and then we'll turn sharply cold, and that is what April does. But let's get this thing going here. Let's bring in some of our important guests and see if we can get the show on the road on this 23rd of March, 2026. Yeah, but I just can't believe last week. I feel like it was a blur. Mike, can you hear us okay?
Hey, James. Yep, you're just fine. How do I sound?
Perfect. Thanks for doing this.
Absolutely. Great to see you. Thanks for the invite.
Anytime you get John Gordon and James Spann together, it's bad.
I'll be ready.
So yeah.
Mike, it's good to see it. There's no gotcha questions here. There's nothing bizarre.
No worries. I'm ready. We're getting ready to start
we will
in the media season, so this is a good tune-up. So
yeah, and see, John has crossed over to the dark side. You know, John is now a media person.
There you go.
He is a television personality in Kentucky. I mean, you can't go to a Chick-fil-A with John. I mean, people, it's John Gordon. John, we love you, man. We love you. I mean,
hope you got some endorsement deals. So
not really, but thank you. There's a lack of personality here, this media member.
Got it.
So are you guys going to the event in USA in Mobile Saturday, CCAPS?
Yes, sir. You gonna be when you coming?
I'll be there Saturday. I just can't get away Friday, but I'll be there Saturday.
Okay.
I will probably sleep little and get up really early and get down there as early as possible. So when are you on the docket, John? What's your time slot?
I got 2 o'clock. I think 2 o'clock Saturday, and then I do 8 a.m. Sunday, and then I do noon Sunday.
Oh wow, wow.
When are you on?
I think I'm on Saturday at 1 o'clock. So I
before
don't have
me.
to follow
That's
you, which is
classic.
good. I don't have to follow you, which is what I mandated with these people. I said, I will come down there if I don't have to follow Gordon. Okay. So
Yeah, right. It's the other way around. Kim,
Are you guys both going to be at CCAPS next
are you
weekend?
going to be there?
Yes.
Yes.
Wow. Now, when are you on the docket? When do you come up?
They put me at 8:30 in the morning on the second day. So I'm going to be doing a lot of everybody's awake. We're so excited.
You're right after me. I'm 8 a.m. or 8:10 Sunday.
No kidding? Oh, okay. Well, if I'm following you are the ultimate warm-up act. Okay. They really wanted to inject Coke into these kids' bloodstreams with you and then me. This is amazing.
Saturday, they're going to have a sound problem because you got Span and Gordon.
Back to back. The best part, Kim, so when John works that early session, he will literally go into the audience and then these college students and scare them to death. He will get up in their face, and it's like 8:30 in the morning. This is great stuff. I mean, it is just go. Mike, you need to come to one of these. You really need to come to one. Have you ever been to Mobile, Alabama?
Yes, and we're going to be there on the Hurricane Awareness Tour in May. So,
okay.
There.
All right.
Awesome.
Yeah.
The chat.
Maybe we need to come back and visit Mike when he's there. But no, the University of South Alabama, they put on this really good weather conference called CCAPS, and it's typically in March or early April, and it's this weekend. And so it's good. The kids do a good job. The faculty, they do a good job, and it's obviously tilted tropical in a lot of ways. So
yeah. Good. Yeah, I was Googling it as you guys were talking about it. So
it's a goofy acronym, but it's what it is.
I don't even know what it stands for.
Cold front. So it's quite a logo.
What does it stand for? What does it stand for, Mike?
All right, here we go. This is my test. Southeastern Coastal Atmospheric Processes Symposium.
Yeah, there you go. You got it. So,
I think that's it. I think this man has it. That's good. Wow. So,
very nice.
And then the question was, who came up with that? It's been at CCAPS for a long, long time. I mean, it's just, once it's CCAPS, it's always CCAPS. But
and they got the symposium up in Starkville, James, same weekend. They didn't schedule properly.
Oh no.
Yeah, that's a little challenging in that you've got literally Starkville and Mobile typically attract the same folks. They'd like to come to both. I'll go to CCAPS this year. I'll go back to Starkville, and I'll bounce back between the two. How about that? All right, let's get this thing started. It's the top of the hour. And by the way, we're not on local television anymore. Since they hubbed out Master Control, they don't have a way of getting us on local television, which is okay. I mean, I don't know how many people watched us on that, but times are changing. I'll put it that way. In fact, my talk will be about changing times. It's a variation of the talk I gave at AMS in Houston for a session there. But having said that, let's get this thing started here. All right, track 1 is rolling, track 2 is rolling, and here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
You're listening to WeatherBrains. They're kind of a big deal.
That's what Bill Curtis says. WeatherBrains episode number 1053, 1053. This is for the 23rd of March, 2026. I'm feeling so much better this week. I still can't believe I did this show last week. I mean, I literally had no sleep, zero, none. And typically I sleep like 3 or 4 hours a night, but we had all-night storms, and then we had snow. But I'm so thankful the weather is remarkably calm. But let's begin with the heat man, the man in the center of the heat dome, the heat index specialist, Troy Kimmel in Austin, Texas. Troy, how hot was it today?
I have no idea, but probably somewhere in the mid and upper 80s. I think that's what we were predicting, but I haven't
Oh,
looked
that's
at
nothing.
climate summer
Nothing.
yet. But
Nothing.
I don't know. We're kind of, as Rick maybe would see, and Kim, and in the central U.S. looking. I don't know why I believe the models, because they've done this before. They give us these pattern changes out at 7 or 8 days, which never materialize. Only in rare form. So we're waiting maybe for some rain, maybe the last day of the month, and probably into the month of April if we're lucky for the central and southern plain states. We'll see.
All models are wrong. Some are useful, as we all know.
Exactly.
Yeah. What's really strange where I am here, we have a cold front pushing through. And typically where I am, when a cold front pushes through on March 23rd, you have flooding, tornadoes, large hail, damaging wind, something. With this one, nothing but a little band of cirrus, and we'll certainly take that. But let's head up to Oklahoma. Rick Smith is the WCM of the National Weather Service in Norman, Oklahoma. Rick, were you cold-fronted today?
We were, and it was a welcome relief after, I don't know, mid upper 90s last week. I was in Kansas City, and it was hot there too. But yeah, I mean, I guess we have to be careful too. If you wish for rain in March and April, it's just what you just described, James. You can't get rain this time of year without the other stuff. Yep. So I guess we gotta have one or the other. So I don't know. But 68 was nice today.
Oh, wow. That's outstanding. We're in the time of the year where people just want to plant things.
Yeah.
And inevitably, they're going to be crushed when that big cold snap comes in in the first half of April. Those things will be just torched. But yeah, typically what happens here, we'll get the big severe weather day, then we turn cold, and everything gets frozen, and it's just March and April. It is what it is. But let's go to the Commissioner Emeritus, Kim Cloko-McLean, our social scientist of the group. Kim, how are you doing this fine Monday evening?
I'm doing wonderfully, and I can tell you the temperature swings here have been a lot, but I'm grateful on one hand that we're not getting a lot of rain, because as you may see behind me, a lot of the contents of my walls from my whole house are here in my office with me. We're getting the house repainted.
Ooh,
pretty much top to bottom. So it's insane right now. But if you don't have rain, it's really good for paint. It's better for it to be drier. Everything dries faster. As we all know, the dew point depression is important for drying things. So that's good, but I will say I'm not necessarily worried about the flood piece, but I am worried. It's actually more likely that my house will burn down as I wait for the paint to dry. Given the fire weather that we continue to have here. Every day has just been the wind searing out of the south. Oh, now it's searing out of the north. And either way, we get fires. And it's been crazy watching the neighborhood Facebook page. People are starting to share apps like Watch Duty and show how you can do hotspot detection, and people are starting to look. And when they smell fire, I've seen people start to say, "Here's where the wind direction is from, and here's where it's blowing to." And there's a little bit of fire weather sense that people are building, which I love seeing that as we mirror, the growth in the science and our detection and prediction capabilities there. Seeing it get brought up and adapted to in society is just wonderful. So, as much as we can keep doing that, Rick, with what you guys have developed here at the forecast office, we are really benefiting from it in this period. And hopefully we get rain just after my walls are painted.
Yeah, it's getting too much of a workout for sure.
And I think people here are more aware of fire weather danger. They're starting to learn about prescribed burns and how to find information on them, because this is the season for prescribed burns here. And those can be terrifying looking, but it's also the season for wildfires. And again, I do think the efforts made by the Weather Service is paying off with the education on fire weather.
Well, James, one other issue that's going on, probably more northwest of you in North Mississippi into southern Tennessee, is that the huge ice storm created so much debris that's being hauled off. It has increased the fire danger. Emergency managers, there have been a lot of burn bans in areas where it may have been more of a marginal thing for burn bans to go into effect, but they said there's so much fuel out there now because of the winter storm that it's just, it's bad.
Yeah, that's a very good point, and it is bad, and so we'll have to watch that. But let's go up Interstate 44 to Dr. James Adelot, the man who is always has a humorous anecdote ready at any moment. James, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Like him, we're doing that up and down with the temps thing. My sinuses are about to explode from Troy sharing his mountain cedar pollen with me, and we'll go from 60s today to 90s by Wednesday or Thursday.
You're welcome.
Hey, appreciate that, Troy.
It is the season. But John Gordon, the legendary Air Gordon, we got to bring in our special guest. We have a very good show coming up tonight. Many questions, and we're going to get many answers from our guest. But let's bring him in, please.
Thank you, Eagle. And Jen, good to have you back, Jen. We missed
Oh, wait,
you.
is Jen on here?
Yeah.
I did not see Jen log in. Wait a minute. Let's bring in Jen. Where are you? Where are you?
Nomad.
I
Where's-
know. I'm everywhere. I'm going to make you guys guess. Okay. Cowtown, Panther City, where the West begins. Where am I? James Aladot, you know.
Does
St. Louis?
Fort Worth
Fort
ever
Worth.
cross your mind?
The West begins in Fort Worth? I didn't know that.
Fort Worth,
I thought it was
sure.
St. Louis.
Yeah, Fort Worth.
So
So the last time
you're in
I'm in
Tarrant County,
Texas.
Texas.
I am. So the last time you saw me, I was on my way to Florida, and I was able to help a friend for a week who had just had surgery. And then back in December, I had a very sweet, just one of my favorite cousins passed away. And we had our celebration of life this past Saturday. So I was able to button things up as the caregiver and make my way west. And I took a couple of days to come out to Fort Worth to spend time with family. So I did that this weekend, and now I'm back with you guys. And then I will be heading back east because I am going to the Mississippi State Symposium and I'm speaking. So I'm working on my PowerPoint. So I'm excited to. I've never been to the Severe Weather Conference. I'm excited about that, and I'm very honored that they're going to have little on me tell about the memorial. So.
That's outstanding. I hate that we've got CCAPS and the Mississippi State event at the same time.
Yeah.
Because three of us are going to be in Mobile, just down the road from you. It's
I
CCAPS.
know.
So,
I know.
wow. So when you're in Fort Worth, just drop Adelot's name. You know, he was a Channel 5 superstar in Fort Worth. He's a big deal. I mean, you drop his name and you're good to go.
Or you go to jail.
Yeah.
No. How long's it been, James, since you were at Channel 5?
Can you believe it's 16, 17 years? Hard to believe.
Wow. Man, time flies. But anyway, Jen, he's still a big deal. So just if you get into any trouble out there in Tarrant County, drop the name and we'll see what happens.
I will.
So, but John, thank you. I didn't know that we had Jen here. So, John, now let's bring in our guest. Go.
Okay, sounds good, Eagle. So we're really pleased tonight, folks, to have the National Hurricane Center Director, Michael Brennan. He runs the whole show. It's a big deal. When the WeatherBrains, they say it's a big deal. This is a really big deal. He's done it all because he was the head of the branch specialists, all the lead forecasters down there from 18 to 23. He was also a senior hurricane specialist, so he's been in the chair when the phones are ringing and everybody wants to know where's the track, what are we going to do? He knows what it's like. He was also the science officer at the Weather Prediction Center in Maryland. And now Neil Jacobs is listening right now. And he said to you that my classmate will be on tonight. So you were both Dr. Gary Lackman at NC State. Is that right, Mike?
Yeah, back in early to mid 2000s. So yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for the invite. And I hope Neil's doing well. Good to see him or hear him, even if he's not on with us. So.
Okay, yeah, sounds good. Yeah, both NC State got a bachelor's, 99, master's, 01, and 05 PhD. Well done. And I think Gary Lackman's one of the best professors in the United States, synoptic. If you want to learn the weather, he's the dude. We're going to have him on this fall.
Oh, great. Yeah. Yeah. He was great, great mentor, great teacher. So I was really, really lucky to get to work with him for a while.
Yeah. So, what got you into weather? We always like the story. Where did it
Yeah.
all begin? Impress James Edeldahl with a funny anecdote. Where did it all begin?
How did it start?
I don't know if it's funny, but I grew up in southwestern Virginia, not exactly like a hurricane hotbed area, but interested in weather from an early age. There was a big flood. I grew up in Roanoke, so there was a flood in November 1985. There was kind of the flood of record on the Roanoke River. I was about 8 years old. My grandmother lost her home. It was a pretty impressionable event for me at a young age, but had always had a fascination with weather, and then just kind of blossomed from there. Ended up being able to pursue that and go into school for it, and was always very interested in the sort of the operational side of things and the forecasting aspects of it. So even though I went on to do graduate school and went on to get a PhD, I was still more interested in sort of the applied research side of things rather than going into the academic side, and was lucky enough to get a postdoc position at the Hurricane Center in 2005 doing satellite ocean winds research and with things like scatterometry and how that applied to marine forecasting and tropical cyclones, and then went on to what's now WPC and came back to the Hurricane Center. It's almost been 20 years ago. So time flies, but it's a pretty interesting place to be. And we've got a really important job and got a great staff. So really lucky to be able to work with everybody there. Yep, you're muted, John.
I don't know all my Virginia hurricanes.
Yeah.
What was the big hurricane in Virginia? Was there one that I think of Virginia? I think of Camille, but that was a long time ago.
That was before my time. Yeah, that was 69. So I remember, Juan, the remnants of Juan from 85 on the Gulf Coast were part of the flood event that I mentioned in 1985. But Hugo made a big impression in 89 because it had that inland track up through South Carolina and Western North Carolina. So that was another big event. I went through Fran in Raleigh in 96, right when I started school at NC State as well. So that was another pretty impactful event, very far inland, which is an increasing theme of hurricane impacts in recent years.
Yeah, I'll just tell you, I brought Fran ashore. Fran was not happy. Fran was very angry. I lost 2,000 feet. Fran was not happy at all, and did a lot of damage way inland too.
Yeah, into the Raleigh area, huge tree falls. Power was out for days. It was very warm. It was early September, so it was very warm after. Pretty impactful event. Probably the biggest hurricane inland in that part of North Carolina. Even to this day, surpassing, Helene was much worse farther west, but that far east was Fran.
Right,
still the super record.
So, all right, for our listeners, I thought we'd do this.
Sure.
All right, so you're a week out. There's a strong wave in the Verdes. Tell our listeners, we'll just kind of go through this. What happens, or how far out will you name something, or what's it like in the outlook in the deep, like 5, 6, 7 days?
Yeah. So the outlook, where we talk about things that could form goes out 7 days now. So we're watching things 7, 8, 9, 10 days in advance, trying to figure out, when we typically put things in the outlook when they get to a 20% chance of formation within that 7-day period. So that's sort of the starting point. And then, we try to hopefully have a pretty early detection of the potential for development. But, anytime you put something in the outlook, it's going to get lots of attention, no matter where it is. But especially if it's anywhere near the western part of the basin, the Caribbean, the islands, over to the Gulf, huge amounts of attention there. But it's funny, do you think about when I got to the Hurricane Center, the outlook we still put out only went out like a day or two. And it had no probabilistic information. It basically was telling you what we saw on satellite imagery. There's a tropical wave here. It might form in the next day. And then we gradually went to probabilities out to 2 days, went to 5 days. Now we're to 7 days. So the amount of information we provide people on the front end of a storm is tremendously more valuable than it was 10 or 15 years ago. So, the other things we're looking at for, say, a storm coming across the Eastern Atlantic or a system is, well, when can we get aircraft out into it? We tend to try to deploy the hurricane hunters to St. Croix first. NOAA can sometimes fly out of Barbados, and flying out there, we can start to get into a system when it gets to between 50 and 52, 53 degrees west, about a day east of the islands. But it requires a lot of, we're making that decision maybe 2 or 3 days ahead of time, talking to the flying squadrons because they have to start moving people, moving planes, moving supplies, and get people in position so that they can go fly that mission 2 to 3 days from now. So we have a lot of advanced planning goes into things like that. Are we moving the Gulf Stream high altitude jet down there to go start flying a potential hurricane threat? So, and then it just builds from there. Now we might be issuing a forecast and watches and warnings before we even have a tropical depression. We've been doing that for 10 years now, the so-called potential tropical cyclone products. We used to have to wait until we had a system to start issuing forecasts, and that didn't do people much good if the storm formed right on top of you or just a day or so in advance. And now we can give people up to 3 days worth of lead time. So for a system like a Helene that's forming close to land, something moving quickly toward the islands, we can get watches and warnings and forecasts out now, way ahead of what we used to be able to do.
Yeah, it's a huge change. So when you got there in 2008, you had no graphical, you had no probabilistic. Is that right?
Right. No graphical outlook. No, the graphical outlook came along pretty soon after that, but it was we just circled an area on the map, and it was basically circling something on a satellite image, because even back then, sometimes there was confusion. We might have 2 or 3 things in the outlook and people didn't know which one we were necessarily talking about. People didn't have the geography to know, what's 500 miles east of the Lesser Antilles. So, so we've gone from totally qualitative outlook, just a picture, now to all this, probabilistic information, and the probabilities are pretty good. Genesis has gotten a lot better in the global models. The forecast of the environment's gotten much better. We actually have guidance now that gives us quantitative probabilities from ensembles, and we have tools. It was funny when we first started doing the graphical, the probabilistic outlook. The hurricane forecasters weren't very well calibrated, even within the unit. Someone would look at something and say, oh, that looks like 30%. And then the person coming in next would be like, oh, that's more like 50%. And so we had these numbers that would bounce around, or we had very different interpretations of what the guidance was telling us because it wasn't any good. Now we're much better calibrated, and we have a lot more consistency internally about how we are able to make those forecasts.
Yeah, exactly. So we just got a question on YouTube, James?
I had a question from a YouTube commenter. How far out can you reasonably see this outlook going in the future?
Well, the Climate Prediction Center does week 2 and week 3 now, in terms of a global tropical hazards outlook. So we're already kind of, between us and them, kind of covering that sort of, week 2, 3 week time scale. I don't know if we would get much beyond a week for what we do, because we're issuing something every 6 hours. If you get out beyond a week, the time cadence of new information, for something that might be 10 to 14 days in advance, you're not going to be providing people with a lot of information every 6 hours or so. That might be a little bit much in terms of cadence. My CPC does a 1 to twice a week outlook for those 2 to 3 week periods. So, I could see us maybe starting to get out a little farther, but not right away. I think our first goal for 7 days the next goal for 7 days is going to be to get the track and intensity forecasts out to day 7, which will probably happen in the next couple of years. We've been doing them in-house for a long time, but I think that'll be our next move to sort of push timelines out.
Okay. Is there a magic limit of how far you would name something like beyond 8 days? Is there like a Bob Sheets or Neil Frank thing that's still in the book so you can't do beyond whatever that date is?
Oh, do you mean like how far in advance or something?
Yeah, like would you issue a TD day 9 out? I mean, where it's 9 days out, it's so far out. I mean,
we're far away from land. Sure. Yeah. I mean, okay. If it's formed, we start writing forecasts on it because we have a huge marine user base. I mean, they're making decisions. The marine industry is making decisions about avoidance and routing changes 7 to 10 days in advance, because it's real easy to do at that time range, which is much harder to do when you get within a few days. And they're worried about timing and fuel use and all the economic impact of that. So, and we have customers from DOD to the entire marine community to every aviation, and everybody uses our forecast, not just land-based users. So yeah, we'll write advisories on something wherever it is, whenever it forms.
Okay. So, all right, you're getting closer, you're getting out of the outlook. Now you're getting into more of the 0 to 4 days, whatever you're pointing. What happens next at the NHC?
Well, we're trying to get aircraft in the storm as often as we can, because that data is really valuable for our forecasters to be able to look at and directly assess, how strong the storm is, what are the flight level winds, what's the pressure. But that data now gets into the models, which is a big change from 15 or 20 years ago. And the models are 10 to 20% better when they have recon data in there. All the recon, the tail Doppler radar, the flight level winds, the dropsondes, all of it. So we really want to try to maximize the aircraft coverage. So we spend a lot of time working with the Air Force Reserves and NOAA to just kind of keep that cadence going and understand what their limitations are in terms of, does the aircraft need a down day for maintenance? Does the crew need a down cycle for sleep? And, trying to build that into the cycling 3 or 4 or 5 days in advance. But then we get into the messaging. So there's a lot of work that goes into messaging out of that 4 and 5 day time frame, because that's when the uncertainty can still be pretty high. You might have track forecast errors of 150 miles, at that time range. But, there's a forecast and people are starting to see more information. Decisions are starting to be made about, planning for evacuations, even in some localities, or starting to stage supplies or moving things around, or FEMA maybe starting to move resources, or states making decisions that far in advance. So we're trying to drive sort of the high level national message about the storm from an HC. So we may start doing like live streams or Facebook updates, or increase our social media presence in that 4 to 5 day time frame, where we start to focus in on, okay, this is the area where we really want people to start paying attention. And, and then the pace and the cadence and the messaging just increases pretty dramatically from there. Once you get into the 2 to 3 day time frame, you're talking about, winter watches going up for storm surge or hurricane force winds, all the coordination. If you have a system approaching the Caribbean, we're talking to 5 or 6 different Met services in the Lesser Antilles about the watches and warnings that they're going to start issuing and the data they're going to collect and send to us. So all that cadence picks up. In the US, it's the same thing. We're coordinating with the weather forecast offices. And then once you get to within about 3 days, we're running P-surge, the probabilistic storm surge model, because surge is what still drives most of the evacuation decisions along the coast. So that's the information the emergency managers really need to start looking at to get that real-time information about what the storm surge risk is. And we can start to highlight those areas at risk of life-threatening surge. And the messaging gets more and more specific and more honed in on the sort of highest impacts, for the rainfall, the winds, the storm surge, and that cadence just picks up from there.
Okay. So the watches, how far out would you go with a watch? I mean, there used to be strict guidelines. I can see James Franklin giving me these strict guidelines, but how far out will you go?
Well, by the book, the watch is supposed to go up about 48 hours ahead of the onset of, say, tropical storm force winds, or when water is going to rise for storm surge. But in some cases, we do go a little farther out in time if there's very high confidence, like a storm like a Helene or a Milton or some big major hurricane. And then there's also non-meteorological factors that go into when you're going to issue a hurricane or storm surge watch. We don't like to do it at 11 o'clock p.m. Eastern time. Doesn't do anybody a lot of good. There are concerns about issuing WEAs at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning for people. So we try to take into account. So you'll see a lot of watches and warnings go up at 5 p.m., even though they might be a little early, because we just want to get them out in time for people to see them before they go to sleep that night. And so they don't wake up to something and then lost 6 or 12 hours of potential prep time. So that is something we're thinking about, is do we want to have a more flexible lead time for watches or warnings, potentially? The last time we changed the lead times for watches and warnings was 2010. Warnings used to be 24 hours and watches 36, and now we're 36 and 48. Do we want to go to, say, closer to 60 hours, something like that, especially for high-end, high-confidence situations? And then the warnings follow on from there, and we try to get more specific and really hone in on those affected areas.
Can't hear you, Troy.
There we go. Mike, thanks for being with us tonight.
Sure.
Got a question. Would you consider, and I remember these back in the old days, and I'm sure they exist now because I think they're still in HERVAC and things like that, but would you consider population density along that Gulf Coast and evacuation times in the issuance of particularly warnings?
The warning timeline is really beyond. It's kind of almost for most communities, evacuation decisions are being made at the watch time frame or even longer.
Okay.
That's another reason why we're thinking of, do the watches need to be a little farther out in time? The warnings for 36 hours for smaller communities that have lower population density, lower clearance times, that often can be enough time for a decision to be made by an emergency manager and still get people out. But it's overall goes into that same discussion about non-meteorological factors. You might be more sensitive to an area that was hit earlier in the same season. You go back to 2020, you had Laura affect Western Louisiana, and then you have Delta come along, just a few months later, a few weeks later, and you have a vulnerable population there. So all those kind of, socioeconomic factors might come into play.
But here's one for you that is a follow-up to that. How do we have to get past the damn thing? Excuse me. That's what I think about it with watches and warnings, because most people are going to think about the warning time as being the evacuation time. And I'm not sure we've communicated that well, that you may indeed have to evacuate in when a watch is out.
Yeah.
Do you think the coastal population of the United States understands that, Mike?
Well, I think we tried to, there's no one size fits all warning timeline that's going to work for everybody. So I think that gets back to those flexible times that we might consider going forward. But yeah, I mean, the evacuation decision timing can be driven by a lot of different things, not just the meteorology, not just the population density, time of day, how many tourists do you have, time of year. So I don't think we'd ever be able to line those up precisely because those are so localized in most cases. So I think we really try to drive people to listen to their local officials, but realize that when your cell phone goes off, when you get a WIA for a storm surge warning, that's another just kind of hit with the hammer to say like, hey, if you're in an evacuation zone and you've been asked to leave, you really need to go now. So they kind of pile on in some ways. I mean, they are highlighting the areas where we think the risk is high enough for people to act, but it's really meant as a reinforcement mechanism for whatever preparedness or information or evacuation that local officials are providing.
And it takes a hit of a hammer sometimes to get people to
Absolutely.
do that. And, and I guess, and I'm sure, Mike, you have time when that warning is issued, you're more than happy to go and knock on people's doors and grab their hand and walk with them. We've all got plenty of time to do that. I think that's part of our problem because I think we saw that in Kerr County, Texas last year. Somehow we've got to do a better job communicating those risks to the public and telling them they must have a plan, period.
Absolutely. And that's what we're about to go into really hitting here in the next, it's March 23rd. We've got a little more than 2 months till hurricane season starts. That's what our goal is that constant re-education effort. Last year we didn't have a hurricane landfall in the United States for the first time in like 10 years. So I was thinking about what are the challenges heading into this hurricane season? Well, there's one right there. We had a relatively quiet season for impacts in the United States after an onslaught of hurricanes over the past few years, at 25 landfalls since 2017. So people's memories are short. People have a lot of other things they think about in their lives. And it's always just this re-education effort. I mean, I live in metropolitan Southeast Florida. We haven't had a hurricane impact here since Katrina in 2005, really at that level. And that's a whole generation of people in one of the most hurricane prone areas of the country that haven't been through anything really worse than the peripheral effects of Irma in 2017, which was now 10 years ago. So even in our own community where we all live at the Hurricane Center, there's that constant re-education, and you have constant churn and turnover in your population, and people really remember what happens to them individually. So you can have a close call event or a near miss. And we've had a lot of those, say, here in South Florida, impacts from Milton, impacts from Helene, but not a real, major hurricane direct impacts here. So it's a challenge we face every year. And we're also going to go into a year where it's probably going to be an El Nino. Is that going to affect the overall seasonal activity? Are we going to have seasonal forecasts that say, hey, there's going to be a less active hurricane season? Well, there's another challenge to potentially overcome in terms of messaging and preparedness. So every year has its own unique kind of challenges it presents, but in other ways, the challenges are the same every year.
Thanks, Mike.
Sure.
Go ahead, Kim.
Mike, on that note, I'm curious from your perspective, these outlooks that, you get at the beginning of the year that talk about, oh, it could be, a more intense year than usual or, less. Do you find those to be a valuable communication tool, a complicated communication tool? You've talked a lot about how a lot of what you're putting together, you're putting together with an awareness of the decision process across time, and you're trying to push into things in a different way. What role do these serve?
They're complicated. I think it's a good way to think about it. I remember before heading into the 2024 hurricane season, there was more hype about how busy that season was going to be than I can remember in my whole career. And even when you do have a busy season, it doesn't play out in like a straight line. It's not activity, activity, activity. You have dips and rises and activity. We saw that again last year. Last year was a weird hurricane season. We had not a lot of activity in the deep tropics. We had a lot of weak tropical storms, and then we had 3 Cat 5 hurricanes. So, uh, there's no one size fits all message to say, hey, the hurricane season may be busy, may not be busy, but people still have to prepare the exact same way, regardless of what a seasonal forecast says. So, as a scientific endeavor, it's absolutely valuable and worth it. It just is a complicated messaging challenge because, again, people only care what happens to them for the most part. And you can have impacts in a very quiet overall hurricane season. You can have severe impacts, and it doesn't take category 4 and 5 hurricanes making landfall to produce significant impacts either. So we're always kind of battling back against that perception that a quiet, relatively quiet season means people don't have to be ready.
Rick, I'll just call you out here. This is something that we talk about a lot here in Oklahoma with severe weather. Even if it's not a favorable pattern, all it takes is one, and then you've got an awful year. And that's part of, yeah, it's part of where I was thinking about going with that conversation too, the messaging challenge. I'm sure that depending on how a year turns out, do you feel like you're almost always chasing the tail of that messaging from whatever starts at the beginning of the season? It tees up an expectation, and then you're
Yeah.
judged against it, even though every single year is going to be so unique. That has to be an interesting life cycle.
Well, I remember during the 2024 hurricane season when we got to August, if you remember, it was really quiet. It was almost dead, but it was the seasonal forecast for a lot of activity. We were simultaneously answering questions about why it was so quiet and why the season was going to be busy. So it's one of these weird challenges where you're trying to message about the potential. And for the United States in particular, the back end of the hurricane season is really dangerous. And you can have a quiet, traditionally June and July are pretty quiet. Even early August, there's not a lot of activity, but you get to that late season activity, mid to late September on through October. You get all the systems that form in the western part of the basin. You can have a really quiet early season, and if you backload the activity, you're in big trouble. And we've seen a lot of that western basin activity in the last few years, and a lot of the ACE or accumulated cyclone energy forming late in the season the last couple of years. So you're almost messaging, don't give up on hurricane season yet. We still have a long ways to go. Sometimes go back to 24, we had Beryl. We had a Cat 5 hurricane in the Caribbean in early July, which was unprecedented. And then the season just stopped for about 6 weeks, if I recall correctly. So and then you're expecting, and then what happens at the end? You have Helene, you have Milton, you have all this activity late in the year that it doesn't care what the actual seasonal forecast was or what the basin looked like. And it kind of goes back to your point about the pattern can change. Even in an unfavorable year overall, you can find pockets of time and space where a system can thrive. And all it takes is a few days for everything to kind of align properly, and you can have a really bad situation real quick.
Yeah, I'll tell you, that's right. Beryl, that one year. How about Audrey in 57? That was a Cat 4, and there was nothing the rest of the year. And that was way early.
Yeah. Andrew in 92 is the poster. August,
Yeah.
The A storm, Cat 5. And I don't think anybody knows about any other storm that happened in the Atlantic in that year.
That's exactly right.
There was a strong El Nino, but a devastating storm. So.
Yeah. Okay. So we got a question from Jake from Penn State. Says, What was the operation tempo like for Director Brennan during a Cat 5 striking Jamaica? What was his life like?
Well, yeah. So the Melissa last year. So, we had a lot of lead time that Melissa was going to happen, at least something there. That goes back to that sort of week 2 to 3 outlook. CPC started outlining the potential for formation in the Caribbean, more than 2 weeks in advance. So we knew there was the potential for something there. And when you get anything in that part of the Caribbean that time of year, you have the potential for something to be very strong. The forecast for Melissa was really challenging, though. We had this big disagreement early on. We were either going to have something that formed and moved northeast very quickly, got strong quickly, and went over Hispaniola and out into the Western Atlantic, or something that took its time to develop and was going to linger in the Caribbean and then move more westward before turning northeastward near Jamaica or Cuba. So, we've had a lot of high-end landfalls in the last 10 plus years, and they're all kind of devastatingly awful in their own special way. I mean, I think when you do this job as long as I have, like, those are the things that are really kind of seared into your mind, is watching Michael make landfall, or watching Dorian, or watching Melissa. And, one of the things that was different with Melissa was we were able to well anticipate the rapid intensification. We have better tools now than we've had even 5 years ago to be able to make those types of forecasts. We forecast a Cat 5. That's something that historically the Hurricane Center very rarely would make a Category 5 forecast for something that wasn't already right at the cusp of Cat 5. So to be able to anticipate 3 or 4 days in advance that you're going to have a Cat 4 or Cat 5 landfall is really extraordinary. But the cadence of data and the information and the coordination really picks up. There was a lot of media interest internationally and even in the United States for Melissa. So we were doing media pool, a lot of media interviews, a lot of coordination with the State Department and other U.S. government interests. So we get pulled into a lot of briefings, especially at my level, which is focused mostly on the communication aspect. But then, we're watching the data come in with everybody else, and we're watching that sort of horrifying moment play out that morning of landfall, and you just see the storm continue to strengthen hour after hour after hour, and what's coming. And you've been on the ground, and after a Category 5, I've been there a few times. You know what it looks like, and you know what it does, and it's not easy to watch happen. Even when you can forecast it, you still know what it's going to do to that community, and that's a dividing line. There is in Jamaica, there's now a before and after Melissa, just like in Mexico Beach, Florida, there's a before and after Michael, and those are those generational events for those communities. And so you're busy at the time, but that's always still in the back of my mind is thinking about the impact of it. And one of the things we're trying to focus on is the post-storm safety. That's been a huge focus of ours the last few years. How do you keep people safe after widespread power outages using generators? You got to message that before the storm, because after it hits, you can't reach people. There's no way to communicate with people anymore. So we started to see those fatality numbers after Laura in 2020 in Texas and Louisiana, huge generator fatality numbers. And that was a real eye opener for us. So we started messaging that. We worked with the WFOs and and the EMs to really get that out there. We're messaging post-storm heat risk that overlays with areas where you're going to have power outages. So it doesn't just end with when the hurricane's gone, that's not the end of the hazard. So we're thinking a lot about that too. And so it's a real continuum of messaging the whole time.
Go ahead, James A. You got the YouTube question?
Yeah, I've kind of developed a question based on some YouTube comments. How do you handle the nuance of knowing perhaps it's not a high-end hurricane on the Saffir-Simpson scale, but can still do incredible damage, even if it's not really super close to landfall? How do you handle the nuance in that? Because there have been some incredibly high damage totals from fairly close hurricanes, but not direct hits.
Yeah, it's just focusing on the hazards themselves. Like last year, we had multiple big East Coast storms that affected the United States East Coast and resulted in widespread surf and rip currents, dangerous fatalities. Look at Aaron, created a lot of hazardous conditions along the East Coast. I think, and we don't emphasize the Saffir-Simpson scale except when we think it suits our needs, and that's when you're really up into the higher ranges. We're not talking about, hey, it's a category 1. We try to talk about hurricanes, and then we'll start talking about major hurricanes, because there is a big difference in sort of, especially the wind and even the storm surge impact at those higher categories. But you really have to focus on the hazards, and we have a lot more information on our webpage now about rainfall and flooding risks through what WPC provides, the excessive rainfall outlook. The actual rainfall itself. We're doing more on rainfall in the international realm as well. And you just have to hit the hazards. And sometimes storm surge, you give a Gulf Coast slow moving Cat 1 hurricane can cause just as much storm surge as a fast moving Cat 4, depending on the size and the angle of approach. So it's hard to boil it down to one number or one label. So we really have to focus on all of the hazards and the products that go associated with them. So
I know that's probably really well received by emergency managers, communication people. Is there still a hunger from the general public to make it simpler?
probably, yeah. But hurricanes are complex events, and when you have overlapping hazards, there's not just one. And the risk varies in space and time during an event. So I think if they were simpler events to message, we would probably message them more simply, but they're not. And everybody, each hazard requires its own type of response or preparation. You have evacuations, you have other types of preparation, and it varies in different parts of the country. You have different building code standards, you have different communities are going to fare differently from one part of the country to the other in a certain kind of wind event. Storm surge risk varies pretty dramatically. But I think we're trying to get to the point where we have information on the various hazards themselves, and we have a lot more of that information than we did 15 or 20 years ago. We did a lot of, sort of 20th anniversary retrospectives from Katrina in 2005. And you go back and look at what we had in Katrina. If you just had the storm surge hazard, we had a line of text and an advisory and a couple of numbers. We didn't have any maps. We didn't have a warning. We didn't have any risk mapping or how far inland it could go. So it's still complex, but it's complex. Some of it's complex because we can tell people so much more now. I still tell the story or tell the anecdote that in the time of Katrina, or go back to Andrew, the forecasts were terrible, but the messaging was really easy because we could only tell people a few things about the storm. We could tell people what it was right now, what the category was, where it was. That's why there's still that sort of, tied to so much about, the storm is this, because 20 or 30 years ago, that's about all we could tell people. The forecast only went out a couple of days. The tracks weren't very good. There wasn't much hazard information, but back then everybody got all their information from one place, from watching local TV, pretty much. And there was one source or two or three sources, but everybody was getting the same information at the same time in a very kind of organized way. Now the information we have is much more helpful and useful and voluminous, but now people are getting their information in a million different ways. So the messaging's gotten harder, even as the meteorology and the forecast has gotten a lot better.
Hey, let me horn it. I know it's not my turn here, but while we're on this subject, I want to bring up Hurricane Sally, Mike. You're aware of that situation, and it just seemed like for all of us, the messaging was off. People were caught off guard. They didn't expect it. If you could wave a magic wand and go back and do Hurricane Sally over again, what would you do differently in terms of messaging?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, obviously, you want the forecast to be better because if the forecast is poor, the messaging is going to be a challenge because you're going to end up either highlighting the wrong geographic areas or you're going to underestimate or overestimate the level of threat from a particular hazard. And in Sally, as the track kept shifting and the storm got stronger than expected, that just creates a lot of messaging challenges that are difficult to overcome, especially when those changes are happening like in the last few hours before landfall. Thankfully, that doesn't happen a lot, but it still does happen. We saw that with Ian, and it made a shift at the last minute or last few hours, and that created its own messaging challenges in Southwest Florida. So, there's no way to wave a magic wand and make it all better, but I think, again, trying to broaden out the risk in those situations and the risk messaging. If you know the forecast is more uncertain than usual, you can broaden out that risk and try to communicate it that way. But you don't always have that ability with foresight to know that, hey, this forecast isn't going to be very good compared to another situation.
James A, follow up?
Nope, already did. He got
All
it.
right. You good?
I'll get
Kim?
the YouTube question after Kim. After
Okay.
Rick. We got a long line ready for takeoff.
Kim, you're up. You're on the air.
We've all you're on the air. We've all queued up spectacularly here. So I'd love to just go back a little bit to something that you mentioned when you were talking about watching hurricanes make landfall with the folks at the Hurricane Center. Is there some special information that you guys do get, or something that you're doing to be tuned in to getting reports in real time as these things happen? I think people in their minds, they have this picture of it's this hive center where you've got like, oh, real time, we've got water up to this high at this place, and we're hearing there's boat rescues over here, and whatever. What is it like to be there during the landfall? Or are you just kind of like us, watching CNN and seeing the hapless meteorologist standing in a parking garage waiting to see how high up on their waist the water gets and going, don't do this, folks.
Right. We'll try this at home. We're not at home. It varies a lot from storm to storm. So if we have aircraft reconnaissance in the storm, we have the CARCA unit, which is the Air Force Reserve unit that does all the aircraft coordination with us. And they get data off the plane. Sometimes that they get it to us before it actually goes out, so we're getting the latest information from them, especially if the aircraft finds something that's unexpected. Or like in the case of Melissa last year, we found out that both the NOAA and the Air Force aircraft got severe turbulence in the eye, and people got injured on the plane, and the planes had to turn around. And so we're getting that information in real time, certainly ahead of when it might come out otherwise. We have ham radio operators that come to the office, and they're talking to ham radio folks in affected areas and sometimes getting valuable reports, especially in international areas. We're looking at things like NWS chat. We're in the WFO chat rooms of the affected areas, looking at observations, looking at emergency manager reports. So it's all of that. And then there's other times when you have a hurricane landfall in areas where there's not a lot of data, not in the US really, but in some international areas where there's almost no information. And so it's sometimes it's this really striking contrast. You have a hurricane make landfall on the west coast of Mexico. There's no radar. There's very little surface observations. There's no water level gauges. So when you had like a storm like an Otis a couple years ago, it was very little information in real time other than what you see on satellite imagery or some scattered surface observations. So, but for a U.S. landfall, our cadence of products goes to hourly or even more frequent. So we're always issuing those hourly position updates or an hourly advisory, getting ready to declare landfall. That's obviously a big moment of sort of coordination. You go back to a storm like Melissa, when is landfall happening without radar data, and you're looking at satellite imagery? Sometimes it's not, even with a well-defined eye, sometimes you're not quite sure exactly when landfall happened. And it actually ended up being in our post-analysis about 15 minutes later than we thought it happened in real time. But you're trying to make your best estimate of the intensity of the storm, because that gets a huge amount of media attention and attention within the community, especially if you're near some category threshold. You're trying to make the best sense of all this data that's coming in very short order, and so it can be a bit of a scramble. But we try to take a really measured approach, and it's a collective effort. We might have 4 or 5, 6 people out there at a Melissa landfall or a landfall of another big storm, looking at all the data, trying to get the best analysis we can and get those products out as quickly as we can, because we know how much attention it gets. But at that point, the impacts are happening. So from a preparedness standpoint, that's kind of late in the game, but there is a lot of interest in what's actually happening at that same moment of landfall.
Mike, this is fascinating stuff. We appreciate you being here. I'm always interested in the behind the scenes. So can you take us through what's staffing look like on a normal, here comes a hurricane mode, and how does staffing change as you get into an event? And also tack onto that, if you don't mind, let's say a storm is going to affect the Miami area. How are you guys okay to stay there? And just talk about the staffing and the plans and what you're doing to stay safe.
Sure. So the hurricane specialist unit has 10 to 11 forecasters. So we typically have 2 folks on shift, 3 shifts a day. But as you know, our forecast workload is pretty activity dependent. So sometimes we don't have any active storms and we can scale that staffing back to 1 person. And if we have, 3 or 4 systems, we might have 3 or 4 people on shift covering it, depending on the complexity. The forecast cycle for an open ocean storm that's relatively doesn't have a lot of reconnaissance data or real-time data coming in, 1 person can reasonably do 2 forecast packages in 1 cycle. It's about a 3-hour forecast cycle. Can't do any more than that. And if there's any kind of watch warning coordination or aircraft data or any complexity to the forecast at all, it's really 1 person doing 1 forecast per cycle. So it really varies. But in a U.S. landfalling hurricane situation, we might have 3 or 4 people on shift because you're doing the hourly position updates. You've got all the aircraft data coming in. You've got all the coordination. You've got a lot of phone calls. Well, not as many as we used to. We used to get a lot more like phone calls and stuff from the media during events. And that's really changed over the last 10 or 15 years. When I first got to the Hurricane Center, we used to bring in people just to answer the phone because it would just ring off the hook. That's really changed. So, but the activity can get to the point, I think back to a day in 2017 when we had Irma and Katia and Jose, all 3 hurricanes in the Western Atlantic basin, all with watches and warnings. And we had Irma threatening South Florida, and that we were basically maxed out in terms of, everyone was there. Everybody was basically working. And that sort of dovetails into the second part of your question about what do we do in a South Florida threat? Well, if you've been to our building, it's basically a concrete bunker. It was built in 1995, or we moved in 95, just over 30 years ago. And it was built after Andrew for the Hurricane Center to basically have a shelter, to be able to shelter in place during a storm. We moved, at that time, we're farther inland than we were back in the early 1990s. We're over on the west side of the Miami metro area, kind of out on the edge of any kind of storm surge risk, so we don't have to worry about that. But we shelter in place. The last time we did that, really the only time we've done a prolonged shelter in place was during Irma in 2017, because Irma was a big, slow-moving storm. We had tropical storm conditions for like 36 hours and high-end, 50-knot sustained winds. We had sustained winds right up to hurricane threshold for 12, 18 hours, something like that. So it was a prolonged shelter in place. So we had to bring everybody in who might have to work over a 2 or 3 day period. And we all just had to kind of tough it out there, close the shutters, and basically we're inside with the Miami Weather Forecast Office. And it's not a comfortable situation, but we were there. And we also have our backup offices up in College Park, the Weather Prediction Center. And we're working on, one of the things that came out of COVID was a lot more flexibility in terms of remote access to systems and being able to work from different places. So we're testing out the ability to work out of the Aircraft Operations Center in Lakeland, which is a lot closer for us to be able to drive to in the case of a storm threatening South Florida. So we have a lot more options now than we did 10 or 15 years ago, with the ability to kind of work from multiple places. And so that's sort of how we deal with it. It's not something, again, we've had to deal with a lot, but it is something we have to prepare our own staff for every hurricane season. In the last couple of years, we've done preparedness webinars. Like I said, it's been a long time since South Florida has been directly affected. We have a lot of staff that never even went through Irma here, newer folks. And so they're just as interested as everybody else in how do you get ready? How do you prepare your home? How do you take care of your friends and family in advance of a storm? Because that's a really important thing for you to have that peace of mind, so you can, come to work and focus on that too.
That's really fascinating. And talk a little bit about, this is part of what's going on there too. Talk about your role as the media spokesperson. How does that all work? I know there's a pool of media. I don't know all the terminology necessarily, but talk about what you're doing and how you are kind of the voice and the face of the Hurricane Center when something like this is happening.
Yeah, during an event, my job's mostly on the communication side. We do, the Hurricane Center has had a media pool presence. Actually, thinking about it, when Neil Frank passed away late last year, he was the one who really started the media pool back in the 1970s. the ability to talk to national television, local television in the affected areas. And that media pool has continued all the way up through now. We do it a lot earlier than we used to. It used to be really focused on the watch warning time frame. Now we try to get out there 3 or 4 days in advance. And it helps us drive the message. It helps us talk to local meteorologists in affected areas. Because I think, people watch TV a lot differently than they used to. But when there's an emergency in your local area, people still turn on their local TV. And it helps us reinforce that information. We're talking to the broadcast meteorologist, explaining what we're seeing, helping reinforce the watch warning or preparedness information that they're giving out. So when we activate the media pool, it's basically a continuous cycle, hour after hour. We do 5-minute hits, sometimes with national media, sometimes with local media. And we do it for several hours. We usually take a break in the hour leading up to the advisory coming out, the new forecast, and then we hit it again. So we tend to run the media pool from, say, 6 a.m. till 8 or 9 p.m. For a big event. But we can scale that to the demand that comes in. And television has changed a lot. So people's viewing habits and how we present ourselves on the media have changed. We're doing a lot more live streams where we just go on and, hey, we think there's something important to talk about. We're going to put it out on YouTube or Facebook live. And we start doing that at a longer lead time so we can start to help craft the message there. And we do a lot of briefings, IDSS briefings for FEMA, federal agencies, states. So that's all going on in the background. And obviously people don't see as much of that, but that's a really important part of the communication as well.
Okay, this comes from John and Lynn in Sellersburg, Indiana. You have the Saffir-Simpson scale that is all based on wind and pressure. Is there any thought of doing what Fujita scale, EF scale did to including storm surge into the categories?
Well, the storm surge used to be in the Saffir-Simpson scale. We took it out because it really did not scale very well to the categories. And that was one of the challenges we had going back to multiple events. But I think there was a big push to take it out of the scale, especially after Katrina and some other events. Storm surge is much more driven by storm size, forward speed, bathymetry. You can have the same category hurricane make landfall on the Gulf Coast of Florida and the East Coast of Florida, and you could probably have 15 feet different in storm surge inundation just based on that alone. So I don't think we want to do any more scales. The Saffir-Simpson scale is so institutionalized that I think even if the Hurricane Center never mentioned it again, it would be hard to get it out of the public discussion. So it's only focused on wind now. We don't really relate it to pressure at all, just the wind itself, the maximum sustained winds. And it is useful in that sense to describe the kind of damage that the peak winds will produce in a given area. But we really try to limit its use to that. And the other hazards are much best covered by, hazard information about how deep the storm surge could get, how much rainfall there could be, and what the rainfall flooding could look like. And there is that increased emphasis on the water hazards because those are typically the ones that cause the most fatalities.
Okay. This comes from Bob in Chicago. 30 years ago, the main challenge was track forecasting. 10 years ago, the main challenge was intensity forecasting. What do you think is the main challenge today, and what are you going to do to address the new challenge?
Well, rapid intensity change is still a huge challenge. We have made some progress on it, and we have better model guidance now than we used to. The aircraft data get into models like HAVS and HWRF. We have the AI models like Google DeepMind that have shown some skill in rapid intensification forecasting. So we actually make forecasts of rapid intensification now, which we never did. When I first started in AHC, if you wanted to make an intensity forecast and an increase of 30 knots in 24 hours, one, you probably never would have had the confidence to do it. But if you tried, somebody probably would have stopped you from doing it because there just wasn't the confidence to make those aggressive forecasts. But now there have been. You go back to Helene, where we were forecasting something to basically become a major hurricane where depression formed. You go back to Lissa. Now they're not great all the time. Like Otis was a spectacular intensity forecast failure in the East Pacific, but it's in an area where there was very little data, very limited aircraft reconnaissance, not a lot of information was getting into the models. There wasn't a lot of information for us to look at. And then you get into structure. What does the wind field of the storm look like? Is it going to be big? Is it going to be small? Or is it going to be an eye wall replacement cycle? Melissa was a great example of a high-end Cat 4 or 5 hurricane that never went through an eye wall replacement cycle, sort of defying expectations. And that could have had tremendous impacts on what those hazards would have looked like in Jamaica. You could have had a situation like Maria hitting Puerto Rico where the peak winds come down, but the size of the storm gets much bigger, and you could have had high-end hurricane force winds affect the whole island as opposed to just the western half. Structural forecasting is still a big challenge. And then translating all that into the hazards, the storms, the track and the intensity don't tell you anything about what the wind's going to do, or the storm surge, or the rainfall, or the tornadoes. So I think as we can refine the structural parameters of the storm itself, that gives us a much better sense of what those hazards are going to look like and what their footprint's going to be. And just trying to push that information out to longer lead times.
I want to follow on from that. That was a great question to tee up the one that I'm going to ask. It's a little bit philosophical. You covered really well why we maybe don't want to go toward a new scale. But I think there are other aspects of the philosophy of our communication we can think about beyond the scale. And one that I've always been interested in is the idea of landfall. We do hone in so much on the eye wall as this focal point.
Yep.
There have been a lot of recent hurricanes where we have other ancillary hazards that are part of the system, like heavy rainfall. Think about Helene. It happened in your North Carolina backyard. And that was happening before landfall proper. Do we have it right talking about a hurricane making landfall? Is there room to reconsider when we start to raise these alarm bells and what we're focusing on when we term something landfall?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, there is the need to message the high-end hazards that happen in the eye wall, because that is such a high-end event for a Cat 4 or 5 hurricane, where you are talking about the catastrophic winds, the catastrophic storm surge. So there has to be still a focus on that, but it's got to be way more than that. Like you said, the Helene was a great example. You had one of these predecessor rainfall events where 36 hours before landfall, you were already getting that indirect moisture feed up into the Appalachians. And again, the hazards, you look at the storm surge from Helene too, going all the way down the Florida Gulf Coast to Naples. And we lost all the storm surge fatalities in Helene were in Pinellas County in the Tampa Bay area, hundreds of miles away from landfall. So there is a focus. There is too much of a focus on that. You can see the media sometimes get too obsessed with the landfall location, especially the non-weather media. I think meteorologists and broadcast meteorologists understand that, but kind of the general media will get too focused on, we get phone calls sometimes 3-4 days in advance. Where's the storm going to make landfall? That's the only thing that they're interested in. So again, it's got to be a focus on the hazards. Sometimes you have a very small storm and that really is the only show in town. But when you have these big storms like a Milton or a Helene, you have to broaden out the messaging well beyond that, while still keeping that landfall focus there when it's appropriate for those communities at threat.
So, Mike, I have a question. Ooh,
Sure.
hello.
Go ahead, Jen.
It's so nice to meet you, first of all. And my question is about tornadoes spawned by the tropical systems. Every potential outbreak is very different, depending on what's happening and, the winds and the surface conditions and what have you. You've got an Ivan that produced record tornadoes. And then I think back about Milton, we're looking at South Florida going, oh my goodness, those look like plains tornadoes. It's a lot. So there's a lot that needs to be coordinated with. I just wanted to talk about what kind of coordination happens between the National Hurricane Center with the Storm Prediction Center and also the local offices when things are about to happen here and we're starting to look at an increased tornado threat.
Yeah. So, when we have a coordination call, like an internal weather service coordination call about an hour before the advisory goes out. So we're on there talking about the overall storm forecast, changes that we're making really. And our focus is on the wind and the storm surge hazards. And we're coordinating that with the WFOs. And then we'll have SPC on the call to talk about the tornado risk, which is really mostly focused in the first day or two, really more on the first day. And they provide a sort of a kind of a broad scale tornado statement that goes in our public advisory that talks about the tornado risk. But they're largely doing the tornado watch and other kind of coordination with the WFO separate from our coordination calls. And that kind of happens as it normally would. But we did, after Milton, we talked a fair bit with SPC about, because it was such a high end event, about how to do better with our, kind of messaging through us for those kind of higher end tornado risk events. Because I think with Milton, they had an enhanced risk over portions of the Florida Peninsula, which is pretty unusual for a landfalling, tropical cyclone tornado event. So it's a lot to message. It's not something we're as directly involved with here, but they did provide us with a key message to put in our graphics, and we refer to SPC products both on hurricanes.gov and in our messaging as well. And some of the tornadoes from Milton, I'll add, were in about 5 miles west of my house. So we were very interested watching that morning. It was quite remarkable watching the radar evolution. Thankfully, at least for the South Florida metro areas, the little supercells stayed west of the metro area up until they got north of mostly Broward County, and it got a lot worse when you got up into Palm Beach and Martin and St. Lucie. But if that had been shifted, say, 30 miles farther east early on, you would have had a lot more tornado impacts across Miami-Dade and Broward in some very populated areas that could have turned out much, much worse here in the South Florida metro.
Yeah, that was a epic event. I'm sure you had some good pictures had you been home looking east.
Yeah, it was a little too close for comfort that day, for sure.
Okay, let me read you this. It's got some technical terms for our listeners. I'll let you explain it. This is from James Lewis, one of our loyal listeners that writes Jen all the time. The TAFB, the Tropical Analysis Forecast Branch Dvorak estimates often come up in hurricane forecasts and reports alongside with other Dvorak estimates from the satellite branch. Why do these different estimates occasionally vary considerably?
Yeah. So Dvorak, just as a little bit of background, is a satellite-based tropical cyclone intensity estimation technique. It was developed about 50 years ago by Vern Dvorak. That's what it's named after. He was a meteorologist at the Satellite Analysis Branch of NOAA, which is part of NESDAS now. And he really pioneered this technique by looking at, it's essentially pattern matching. You're looking at the cloud pattern and you're coming up with what's called a T number that gives you an intensity estimate for the tropical cyclone. And he looked at cloud patterns and compared them to storms where they had aircraft reconnaissance data and came up with a Dvorak scale. And there's a satellite analyst looks at the cloud pattern, finds this where they think the center of the cyclone is, estimates the curvature of the thunderstorm activity for developing systems. It's more of an objective technique when the storm has an eye. And you're measuring the temperature difference between the inside of the eye and the ring of convection in the eye wall. But it can be the estimates can be different because analysts can come up with different center positions. And for weak or sheared systems, if the center position is different, you're going to have a very different intensity estimate based on the distance from the deep convection to the center itself. But those techniques still, and there are objective versions of the techniques that are being run in places now, but the subjective Dvorak is still a base sort of technique that every tropical cyclone forecasting center worldwide uses. And for systems without aircraft reconnaissance, which is pretty much most systems outside the Atlantic basin, it's still pretty much the standard for estimating intensity, both for real time and in the final best track data. So, and that technique gets, it really requires expertise to develop. But after a while, you can look at a system and you can pretty quickly estimate how strong you think it is if you're a skilled analyst. And that.
Mike, was that named after a person? I've often wanted to know, where did that, okay, I assume that was a person.
Vern Dvorak, who passed away just a few years ago, was a satellite analysis expert in NOAA's satellite analysis branch, or what's now SAB, in NESDAS. And he was the one who developed the technique. And now it's the basis for all sorts of objective techniques. University of Wisconsin Sims has had an automated Dvorak technique for years, but now there's a lot of AI developed satellite analysis tools that are all looking at different combinations of types of imagery to come up with intensity estimates.
Okay, thanks. James A., what do you got?
Yeah, I had a question from YouTube again, asking about the role of AI. They ask about DeepMind in particular, but just I'll throw out AI of all kinds and what y'all do. Sure.
Well, I think AI gets a lot of attention on the modeling side, primarily. At least that's where most of the focus has been. It's an emerging tool, and a lot of it seems like it's really valuable. We were using Google DeepMind's model in operations last year. We sort of started off evaluating it early on. and we gain confidence in it during the season. And this year we're going to continue to utilize it. It's something that's out there in the public domain already, but we're pulling it in and using it within our computer systems, doing our own verification on it, our own evaluation. And it's another tool in our toolbox. Traditional NWP isn't going away, but the AI models offer a lot in terms of their ability to apparently start to detect some of the rapid intensification. They, in some storms last year, was a leading indicator when there was going to be a shift, say in the track or the intensity. Some of the AI guidance picked up on it earlier. And because the computational expense is so low, Google DeepMind is going to be running ensembles with hundreds of ensemble members this year. Traditional NWP has been limited to, like ECMWF's been running a 50-some member ensemble because of the computational limitations. So you don't capture the entire range of possibilities all the time. But if you get an ensemble with hundreds or even 1,000 members, you really can start to capture some of the low predictability edge cases there. So it's going to be an increasing part of what we do, but I always want to remind people that all the model guidance we use is just a tool. There's still a human there making the forecast. And I always like to share the anecdote when we bring emergency managers in for classes at the Hurricane Center. We walk them through a forecast exercise. And a lot of them are really surprised at how much of a role the human has in the forecast. They kind of come in thinking, oh, that's just kind of automatically comes out. But when they see the forecaster taking such a human role in scrutinizing and making that forecast and the care that goes into it, I think that gives them a lot of comfort in knowing that someone's very dedicated to this, making those decisions in real time. On the analysis side, I mentioned the satellite-based techniques. So there are a lot of AI-based analysis tools that are coming into being now. And so I think, again, on the analysis and the forecast front, they're going to be an increasing part of our toolkit.
Awesome. This is a two-parter. So what would you say to I'll do one at a time. What would you say to the members of the media, private meteorologists, and social media critics? James Spann loves those social media critics who attack the Hurricane Center for a, quote, fish killer storm that will not affect anyone.
Yeah, that's we don't use that word. It's every hurricane has risks, and tropical cyclone have risks. We have a huge amount of marine customers that, and we've had tremendously impactful marine accidents and loss of life at sea. You go back to Joaquin, and you had the El Faro incident down in the Bahamas. You had the loss of a ship in Lorenzo back in 2018. So those storms are very important. And we have storms that pass well offshore the east coast of the U.S. and can kill dozens of people from surf and rip currents. So we're forecasting the storms wherever they are. Just because it doesn't make landfall or get really close to land doesn't mean it's not a threat. So,
okay, part B. What about all the vitriol and hate that NHC gets? James Spann gets all this hate, which he doesn't deserve. And what is it like in the trenches at the Hurricane Center? Let's say and your track errors are very good, Mike. They're really good. But let's say you miss whatever point by 40 miles and the hate comes in. What do you tell your people to do? What do you do?
Well, I think in real time, we try to insulate ourselves from it. I mean, we're not out there looking at social media on the ops floor, looking at critiques of our forecast. Because, when you sit down and you do that, and I've done it many times, you're really very dialed in on the problem of the moment and the forecast. That's not to say we don't go back. I mean, we're probably our harshest critics. I mean, we verify all the forecasts. We look at the errors. We try to understand why the forecasts weren't good. And there's a lot of, even within the office, there's pressure. You feel the pressure to make the forecast better than the one you inherited. So the person coming after you has a better forecast to start with. So there's a lot of self-scrutiny that goes on regardless of what happens on the outside. And I think I always just try to fall back on understanding and knowing how much good we do and that level of service that we provide. And we're pretty open and honest about our forecast errors. And we try to message to people that the forecasts aren't perfect. It is hard because people get to the point where a lot of times the forecasts are really good now, but every once in a while there are really challenging situations. And that's something we have to try to do a better job of messaging when we can anticipate that.
Jen, go ahead.
So we just got a last minute email from our friend James Lewis, who kind of piggybacking off of what I asked earlier in regards to coordination with some of the local offices, but asking how does the National Hurricane Center coordinate with offices for the local hurricane related products? Do they draw the polygons for a product like extreme wind warning by themselves, or do you also coordinate and help make those suggestions in any of those type of products?
Yeah, so we do a lot more with inland wind hazards than we did, say, 10 years ago. Historically, the Hurricane Center, we coordinate the coastal wind watches and warnings and storm surge with the coastal weather forecast offices. And that's always kind of been our sort of turf. Turf's not the right word, but sort of our role in that was the coastal piece. And the offices were really left on their own to decipher and determine when to put up tropical storm and hurricane wind watches and warnings for over inland areas. Starting about 4 or 5 years ago, we started using what we call a wind hazard recommender, where we take our wind speed probability products and we research the thresholds and looked at verification data. And we are now providing the weather forecast offices with a first guess of what those wind watches and warnings could look like. And you can imagine for a storm like Helene, where you're dealing with probably a dozen WFOs, it's really important to create that kind of consistent, unified message. You don't want to have patches of watches and warnings that aren't spatially or temporally consistent with each other for these really big inland wind events. So I think that's been helpful. I think we can probably do more, and we're working on a new generation of our wind speed probabilities to come out in the next couple of years that I think will help improve that as well. On the extreme wind warning, the WFOs really draw the polygons for that, but we will talk to them about when we think the eye wall is going to start moving on shore for those category 3, 4, and 5 hurricanes. So the EWW is basically almost like a shelter in place kind of tornado level warning hurricane eye wall of a major hurricane. So we coordinate with them on the initial issuance, follow-ups, and then we're obviously talking to them about what we think the intensity of the storm is doing after landfall, when it's going to fall below that 100-knot threshold, so there wouldn't be any more extreme wind warnings. And we're in the aftermath of a storm like Helene, where there were more wind fatalities than any storm in the United States since at least the 1950s. We've started to think about, how do we better account for things like wind gusts? There's never been a lot of great guidance on gusts, and the watches and warnings have always been based on sustained winds and not gusts. So do we need to start considering some of the gusts, especially high end like hurricane force wind gusts? So those are things we're working towards, potentially looking at what we might do to improve the wind messaging, especially on the gust side in coming years.
So, John Gordon, is it my turn now? Okay. So I got so many questions, but we're almost out of time. I know you've given us a lot of time, Mike. Thank you. Seasonal forecasts, seasonal outlooks. You're going to have one soon that'll be coming out from NOAA. What do you want people to do with this information? Some guy lives in Port St. Joe or Cape Hatteras or Galveston or Port Charlotte, and it's a forecast of a very active season or a below average season. What do you want people to do with this information? That's an interesting question that I can't answer myself.
Yeah, you need to get ready for hurricane season. I think one of the biggest advantages of the seasonal forecast is when NOAA puts its out in May, it's one of the biggest media attention days that the agency gets. And regardless of what the forecast says, it's probably the biggest opportunity we have to tell people hurricane season is about to start. So that's sort of how I view it. It's a messaging tool to open the door to talk to people about how they need to get ready for hurricane season. Yeah, and I think as Kim just put in the chat, it is a unified media opportunity to get a lot of attention. But people's action shouldn't change based on what the seasonal forecast says. They got to get ready every year. And that's one of those challenges that we were talking about earlier. You don't want people to focus on that. And even when you have a forecast for a busy season, when you think people might use that and take more action to get ready, if it's not busy for a couple of months, people are like, oh, well, that's probably not going to happen, or I don't need to worry about it. So it's a challenge, but I think we try to use it as that kickoff point for the messaging of the season.
That makes sense. But I've known people that they bought generators last year. They heard all this doom and gloom and the outlooks, and they were buying generators and spent a lot of money. And we didn't have a single U.S. landfall. And they're all PO'd, and they're breathing fire, and they're torching everybody. And then it works the other way, as well. When you hear there's going to be an inactive season, well, oh, great, we don't have to do anything. So, but I think the messaging is much better now than it used to be when it comes to this. This is just awareness. Your precautions don't need to change, no matter what happens here. So, but one quick one: do you ever talk with people like Bill Reed or Max Mayfield or Ken Graham, just to to air something out, or just to get some advice, just out of curiosity, the ones that have come before you in this position?
Yeah, we do keep in touch occasionally, see each other at conferences or meetings, and it's a good opportunity to remind people that people have been through this before, and there's a lot of experience. I mean, we still have people at the Hurricane Center who've been here since the early 1990s, and that kind of experience and working with people over the years and seeing that expertise. And that's the real advantage of a place like NHC or any of the national centers that are so focused on those particular phenomena. You really do develop that expertise and that background and what those hazards look like. And a lot of that comes back to people who were in the director's chair. I just talked about Neil earlier and the role he took in the messaging part. And we've all kind of been building on the shoulders of what the people before us, created, and just trying to improve it as best we can going forward. But yeah, there's a lot of camaraderie with the former staff and former folks who have been through these kind of events before, and we do lean on them at times to have somebody to talk to who understands it.
So, and I hope that people listening to this understand that this is a reliable source. Mike, there's an increasing problem with social media jabronis. These are jamokes that post model output, 384 hours in advance, deterministic output showing a major hurricane making landfall at Galveston, at New Orleans, at Gulf Shores, at Miami, and it has nothing to do with truth. And that it will be shared hundreds of thousands of times. And some of these accounts have 1 million followers, and it's nothing more than engagement farms that's designed to make money using the social media platforms, content funds. And it's become a real problem, these clouds. I don't know if you guys ever see this or understand what's out there, but it's bad. And I think we have to do a better job. One example, we had one of these accounts. Let's see, it was 49 times they showed a hurricane landfall on the Gulf Coast. 49 times last summer, just in one season. 49 times. You had people canceling vacations. You had somebody canceling elective surgery because they saw some jamoke, some jabroni on social media posting this nonsense that means absolutely nothing. And of course, way down at the end, there's a little fine print. This is not a forecast. This is model output. Nobody sees that. Nobody. And so I'm hoping that after this incredible presentation, Mike, that people understand that you are the credible source of information. And I think we all have to do a better job, Mike, of pointing people in the direction of credible sources. And so real quick, and we'll have to stop after this, your social media accounts are excellent. You're basically a broadcaster now. So just kind of describe the things that you put out on social media where people can follow you.
Yeah, and we try to, pitch ourselves as a trusted source, but also your local broadcast meteorologist, your local emergency managers, your government officials, follow them. That's a big part of our preseason messaging. And that's one reason why we've stepped more into that realm. We have to have a voice in that space, and we have to start messaging earlier and be more upfront and be more proactive, because if we don't say something, someone else is going to fill the void and set the narrative. So we've had to become a lot more aggressive. And to be fair, and probably go beyond our comfort zone at times to start to message something like a Helene or a Melissa, even if we're not being very specific, which you obviously don't want to be 6, 7, 8 days in advance, but you just want to start raising awareness. So we put out, live streams. We started doing short form video reels in the last couple of years. And as you know, anybody who's doing that, those get a lot, something that's 30 seconds long gets a lot more engagement than something that's 3 minutes long. So the challenge is, how do you condense useful information into 15 or 20 or 30 seconds to really get to that audience that's consuming information in that space, and use that as a way to point them to more information. Go here, find out more here. We do live streams, well in advance of a storm forming, before we ever get to the traditional media pool. But we can't let the other media, the legacy media piece go, because there's still a tremendous reach that comes with that. So our challenge is to try to find the resources to be able to move into all these spaces at once, and to leverage the partnerships we have across the weather enterprise with broadcast meteorologists, with emergency managers, with the rest of the community, to try to all amplify the same message. And I think in hurricanes, compared to other types of weather phenomena, I think we do pretty well. And that's a credit to this entire community and to the relationships we have with each other.
And I think your social media content, Mike, is just excellent. I don't know if you have anybody training you on these live streams and the videos that you're producing, but they're really good. And I would assume that most people working there didn't come up through some kind of broadcast facility. They just had to learn it on the fly.
Yeah, a lot of it is, a lot of key to it is having younger people on the staff that are more fluent in those types of social media compared to my age or people older than me. We're used to operating a certain way. You have young people who want to innovate, who want to push the envelope and try new things. We have had interns over the summer who have been more communication focused as well, and have had a communications background. So that's been helpful. And, but yeah, it's a huge push that we have to be in that space to really make sure our message gets heard, because, as much as we like to think everybody's coming to hurricanes.gov to get the information, and we have a lot of it there, that's not the first place most people are going to see us or engage with us. We have to keep moving out into those new spaces.
Awesome. So, Mike, can you stay for a few more minutes? You've given us a lot of time here. We're going to ask you, after a little break, to come back with a pick of the week. This can be a data source, website, social media, anything. Just be thinking of that. But we're going to have to pause very quickly. We're going to hear from Tony Rice and his astronomy report. We're going to hear from Jen this week in tornado history. Little email. We'll do picks of the week and more as WeatherBrains rolls along.
Looking beyond the atmosphere, here's Tony Rice with your Astronomy Outlook.
There's been a couple of fireballs recently seen in multiple areas of the United States. One over Ohio was so bright that it was seen in the daylight. This has prompted a couple of questions. Where are they coming from, and why are we seeing more of these recently? A fireball is a really bright meteor. The space rock that is what's actually entering the atmosphere and burning up is closer to a meter in size, especially the daytime ones, than what you see during meteor showers, which are closer to the size of a grain of rice. But these bright fireballs usually aren't part of a named meteor shower. That seems to be the case over the past week or so. The only active meteor shower is the very, very weak Xi Hercules, which you've probably never heard of because it's, one, very weak, less than 1 meteor per hour visible even under the best conditions, and two, it's very new, only recently discovered and named based on video analysis rather than actual observations. The fireball that streaked nearly due south from just east of Cleveland down across Ohio was captured on doorbell cameras and dash cams across the Ohio Valley, and it doesn't look to be from that meteor shower, whose radiant in the constellation Hercules was too far to the west at the time. That fireball widely reported north of Houston on Saturday, it was traveling east, so not a Hercules either. And while the fireball seen across California, Nevada, and Arizona over the farmlands of Central California earlier today was coming from the general area of Hercules, odds are it was just another random space rock as well. That's what most meteors are. So, why have we seen so many of these recently? Looking at the American Meteor Society's database of reports, an average of 3 to 4 fireballs are seen somewhere in the world every day. So, not that unusual, especially when you consider that 70% of the Earth's surface is covered with water. So there's another plausibly 2 times as many that don't get reported. And when you consider that only a small fraction of that land is actually inhabited, that number goes way up from there. That's your astronomy outlook. Follow me at RTP Hokie for more spacey stuff like this.
This week in tornado history, it is called the Governor's Tornado. This twister moved 14.8 miles through parts of Fulton County, Georgia on March 24th, 1975. It began in West Atlanta, moving to the northeast at approximately 50 miles per hour and ended in the Brookhaven area. The tornado hit an industrial area, 2 large apartment complexes, several businesses, and hundreds of, quote, fine homes. It also hit the governor's mansion located off West Paces Ferry Road. 550 families were reported homeless. The damage was estimated at $56.5 million, and there were 3 fatalities. Arthur Sosmer was killed when a 2-story brick and concrete wall of the L.D. Brinkman Company collapsed on his car. Catherine Hunkin was killed when an 80-foot tree crashed into the bedroom where she was sleeping with her husband, Walter. And Mark Howard was working at a Pepsi vending warehouse. The roof and walls collapsed and he was crushed. Over 150 people were injured along the path. Read more about this event at tornadotalk.com.
Hey, just maybe. We got a couple of emails to review this week.
First of all, thank you to everyone who has been submitting your questions for our guests. This has been awesome, and we're going to continue to promote that. We love hearing from you and getting your questions. I'm going to go to a question of the week again, since we're getting so much during the show. So this one is from Jessica, and I'm sure we've talked about this before, but I was too lazy to go look it up. So I'm going to put you guys on the spot again. But Jessica asks, just wondering if you had a brand or model weather station you could recommend for my backyard. What do you guys suggest?
I like the one I've got is what I think is pretty popular out there, and that's the Davis Vantage Pros or whatever. Got, in fact, have a number of them around the area. I like them, but I'm sure there's some other technology out there as well. But I definitely go Davis.
I think everybody agrees in the chat session here. That's good equipment, and they've got different price levels where you can kind of pick your entry point. But it's good stuff.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for that question. So we want to look ahead here to what's coming up next on WeatherBrains. Let me see if I can share my screen properly. And John Gordon, you've got more guests coming up. Big one next week.
So
what's happening here?
I believe this is correct. Howie Bluestein, the legend, has never been on before. Is that right, Eagle? Is that correct?
That's correct. Never. This is going to be good.
Okay, so Jane, all the Okies are going to lead this. Rick's going to introduce them, and Kim and James are. Oh, wait a minute, Rick, go ahead, James. Show everyone what you're showing.
I've got the books, and there's a story behind the Synoptic Dynamic Meteorology book with Howie and lecture in his class, and these books weren't there yet.
I mean, he is one smart dude.
Oh yeah.
I mean, off the chart. You're going to love it. If you like severe weather, send Jen a question and email at weatherbrains.com. I'm telling you, this guy knows severe weather. He's like Fujita Jr., okay? He's the real deal. Then we're going to start April 6th. We're going to have one of our first TV shows where we do a market. It'll be the Tampa Bay market. We got Mike Clay and Brian Lamar. And then April 13th, we've got the Coco Ross. I'm sure James will say Coco Puffs, but anyway, the Coco Ross people. You're rubbing off on me, Aildon. Anyway, we're gonna have the Coco Ross show and the state climatologist Russ Schumacher. So we got 3 great shows coming up. And Jen, where do they send their questions to?
To email at weatherbrains.com. Let's have them. We're excited about these shows coming up.
All right, let's do picks of the week. And again, a reminder, this Saturday, Jen, you will be speaking at the Southeast Severe Storms Symposium on the campus of Mississippi State. About what time? Do you know your time slot?
I'm Sunday, I think around in the 11 o'clock hour, 11 o'clock Central in the morning. Yeah, 11:15 maybe.
Okay. And then you've got Air Gordon and the Commissioner Emeritus, Kim. They'll be at CCAPS in Mobile at the University of South Alabama this weekend. I will be at that one as well. So we hope to see many of our WeatherBrains friends on the road this weekend. But let's do picks of the week. This is where we're going to go around the horn. Everybody is going to share something really cool that is weather related. And Mike, we're going to let you go at the end here. So let's go around the horn. Let's start with James Adelot, who's got to do some television here at the top of the hour. So let's get him in first. James, what you got?
This is not my pick of the week, but you can see how he uses his middle initial B as an author on his books. That is not an abbreviation for anything close to the grade I got in his class. So my pick of the week is a tweet somebody sent to me that said, "Sadly, our meteorologist fell off a horse, broke both arms and both legs. Tune in tonight at 10 to see his forecast."
Oh, boy.
Where's the foghorn button?
Yeah, really. Got the rim shot foghorn. It was all playing there.
Yeah.
All right. And again, all the picks will be up on weatherbrains.com. Kim, what's your pick of the week, please, ma'am?
Well, how do I follow that up? I guess I'll
Good luck
talk
with that.
about I'll talk more about injury and death. So my pick of the week is an interesting paper that was just published. We were talking earlier about all the hazards associated with hurricanes, and one of them is heat. After hurricanes pass, there was an interesting paper just released that was looking at sometimes the people who suffer from the heat stress and risk of death are themselves the rescue workers. And just trying to call attention to the conditions that people are working in. Are they sufficiently prepared to deal with these conditions? And so that paper will be up on our website.
Weatherbrains.com. Rick Smith, give us your pick of the week, please.
Well, it's almost April, so of course my pick of the week is going to deal with drought. It's not what we're usually talking about this time of year, but the drought monitor, it's tried and true, but it's just a good reminder of where you can go and get that information, because it's just going to be a thing for a while.
Indeed. And again, all the links will be up on weatherbrains.com. My pick of the week, by the way, it's the shift to the cloud. And Neil's talked about this on the show a lot over the years, but again, that is happening, and a release was put out by NOAA today, so that'll be up on weatherbrains.com. Troy, what is your pick of the week?
Kind of a salute to Mike and the work that all of his colleagues do down in southern Florida. Have to give some credit. I've used this for a number of years, and I figured I would plug it in there tonight. Salute to Matt Moreland, who's now back for a second tour back in Houston, and even to the days of Bill Reed and other folks there. But the National Weather Service office in Houston has always had an excellent Southeast Texas tropical cyclone or hurricane publication that they do every year. They update it. And of course, this is a 2025 link. They hadn't updated it for 26, but this is available in PDF. It's easy to download. Really a nice document. Salute to National Weather Service Office, Houston, Galveston.
Excellent. Weatherbrains.com show notes. It'll be there. Jen, what's your pick of the week? Live from Fort Worth.
Well, since this is our hurricane show, I wanted to look back and found an article from the National Weather Service Newport Morehead City on the hurricane that led me to become a meteorologist, why I even wanted to even get into weather in the first place. Mid-September, the formation of Hurricane Gloria. And I was just fascinated with Gloria. 1985. Why did it start? It moved through the Bahamas and it turned. That was just, I want to know why they turned. So I was going to go to Florida State, and then we moved, and I ended up at Penn State, which was an awesome school as well. And but Hurricane Gloria is why I got into the weather.
And you know my story with Gloria. I was, and at the time, Jen, I was working in that market in Dallas Fort Worth, Channel 4 News, Dallas Fort Worth, with Clarice Tinsley, Steve Bosch, James Spann, and Paul Crane on sports. And got a call from the news director. 11 o'clock one morning, said, "You got a live shot today." And I said, "Great, where?" And he said, "The National Hurricane Center." I said, "Yeah, right, where?" And he said, "The National Hurricane Center." They had a Learjet waiting for me at the Addison Airport. They flew me to the Hurricane Center for live weather at 5, 6, and 10. And of course, Gloria had nothing to do with Dallas Fort Worth, but the TV stations made so much money back then, they honestly didn't know how to spend it.
Yep.
It was insane. But that was my first visit to the National Hurricane Center, was during Gloria back in 1985. All right, John Gordon, what's your pick of the week? Go.
Yes, sir. I was just going to say that, do you realize we had an all-time March record for the United States in the lower 48, Fort Yuma and Martinez Lake? All right, these temperatures, this ridge in the southwestern U.S.
Hot.
Yeah, Torrid Tuesday in Tucson. There you go, James Adeldot. Very hot down there. So my pick of the week is the Kentucky Mesonet, which provides amazing data. Just revamped their entire website. It's rock star. Whoever did this, I told them this today, should get a Kentucky Kernel thing. It's really good. If you want good weather data from great equipment and a nice, easy to use site, go to the Kentucky Mesonet.
There you go. It'll be up on weatherbrains.com. Okay, Mike, you, sir, are up. Give us a pick of the week.
Sure. I've actually got two, but you started off with plugging our video presence at NHC. So I'm going to plug our Tropical Cyclone video series page, which has long and short form videos on tropical cyclone awareness, our products, a retrospective on Katrina from last year. So some really good content there. And then I am going to preview, we have our press release coming out actually tomorrow morning on all the product and service changes that'll be coming out for hurricane season 2026. So I'll make sure you guys have the link to that for everybody to check out tomorrow.
Yeah, excellent. And Mike, if you can just drop that to us by email right after the show here, we'll get that in the show notes. So that's outstanding. But again, the products and services produced are just really good from the Hurricane Center. And I'm not nice, I'm honest. Everybody on this show knows this. I mean, I really do mean that. So thanks for your leadership and everything that you do. And hopefully it's not going to be a crazy season, but we appreciate the work of the Hurricane Center. And if we can ever do anything to help, let us know. And for those that are new here, WeatherBrains is typically on the air every week, Monday nights. We kick it off about 8 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Central. You can watch it on YouTube, but most of you listen. We know that, but we are on YouTube, youtube.com/weatherbrains. But most of you listen to the audio podcast. If you watch, if you listen, thank you. And if you'd like to get in touch with us, anything we've talked about tonight, have a show guest suggestion, if you have a question about weather, anything, please let us hear from you. The email address, it is email@weatherbrains.com. So on behalf of the entire WeatherBrains crew, I'm James Spann. Thanks for listening. Have a great week and God bless. It was a great show, Mike. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Great.
Thanks,
Thank you, Mike.
Super interesting. Thanks a lot.
Good to see everyone. Thanks.
Thanks for your